The moment the palace went silent, everything changed, and what they didn't say may be louder than anything they ever could.
Lied and used fake documents to obtain the interview with my mother. Made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
Family whispers, fear quietly fed behind closed doors, paranoia growing in shadows far from flashing cameras and royal ceremonies, and then suddenly, without warning, a single decision detonates across royal history like a controlled explosion no one saw coming. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't rumor. This was something colder, sharper, calculated. What began as quiet financial murmurs has now hardened into a reality so unsettling that even seasoned royal insiders are struggling to process it. Prince Harry, once protected by legacy, by love, by history, now stands at the center of a legal storm that feels less like coincidence and more like something that was always meant to happen. And because behind the polished image of monarchy, behind the carefully managed narratives, something has been activated. Something old, something buried, something written decades ago by Princess Diana herself. And now it's awake. According to tightly controlled palace sources, a move linked directly to Meghan has triggered a legal response so rare, so precise that many believed it would never be used. Not in this lifetime, not in this generation. The result? An inheritance freeze. Not a delay, not a discussion, a freeze. Locked, suspended, untouchable. And the most chilling part? It wasn't reactionary. It wasn't emotional. It was procedural. Before dawn on January 17th, 2026, while the world slept unaware, senior officials at Clarence House authorized the immediate halt of all distributions tied to Harry. No press alerts, no leaks, just silence, followed by shockwaves. But this isn't just about money. It never was. This is about control. This is about structure. This is about a clause buried deep inside Diana's trust. A clause that wasn't designed to punish, but to protect. A clause no one expected to see activated. Until now. They call it Clause 3. And it doesn't care about public opinion. It doesn't respond to headlines. It doesn't bend to emotion. Its purpose is terrifyingly simple: verify the bloodline or everything stops. No funds, no access, no assumptions, just silence. Palace insiders insist this isn't an attack. Not on Harry, not on Meghan, not on anyone. Officially, it's described as a precautionary safeguard, a legal necessity, a procedural pause. But within royal walls, messages are rarely spoken directly. They are implied, encoded, felt. And this message, it landed hard, because activating Clause 3 isn't just a technical move, it's a signal that something deeper is in question, something structural, something that reaches into the very dna of royal legacy itself. For years, this clause sat untouched, almost forgotten, filed away as an extreme contingency, something Diana insisted on during a time when her life was unraveling, but her clarity as a mother was sharper than ever. She saw something coming, not scandal, not betrayal, but confusion, unanswered questions, silence that lingers too long until it becomes dangerous. And now, decades later, that silence is being forced into the light. Clause 3 doesn't accuse. It doesn't speculate. It simply stops everything until certainty is restored. It demands proof, not belief. Verification, not assumption. And that demand has changed everything. Because once a system like the monarchy, built on continuity, tradition, and unchallenged lineage, is forced to pause, it reveals something uncomfortable. Certainty was never guaranteed. Prince William, stepping into this moment with cold precision, didn't just authorize a legal move. He acknowledged something far more powerful, that Diana's warning wasn't emotional. It wasn't symbolic. It was strategic. She knew. Somewhere in the mid-1990s, during a period where she was distancing herself from palace control but sharpening her own understanding of legacy, Diana insisted on this clause. Not out of fear, but out of foresight. She believed that one day, truth might not arrive easily, that it might need to be forced, and that when it did, it could shake everything. Now, that moment has arrived, and William chose not to bury it. He chose to activate it. Think about that. In a system where silence is often the preferred strategy, where issues are managed quietly, delayed indefinitely, softened for public consumption, this was different. This was decisive. This was structural. This was unavoidable. The inheritance remains frozen, not as punishment, but as suspension, a legal breath held in anticipation of clarity. And that pause is louder than any accusation. reputation. Because it raises a question no one can ignore anymore. What exactly needs to be verified? The palace isn't saying. They don't need to. The clause itself says enough. And suddenly, what once seemed like a private family matter has escalated into something institutional. Something that could redefine how royal inheritance is handled, not just now, but for generations to come. Because this isn't just about Harry. It's about precedent. It's about control over legacy. It's about ensuring that what is passed down is rooted in certainty, not assumption. And behind all of this, behind the legal language, the silent approvals, the calculated timing, there's Diana, still shaping outcomes, still influencing decisions, still protecting her legacy exactly as she intended. Under English law, she had the power to do this, total authority over her estate. She could impose conditions, require proof, delay distributions indefinitely. And she did, not recklessly, not emotionally, deliberately. Clause 3 wasn't a reaction, it was preparation. And now that preparation is dictating reality, because when truth becomes uncertain, the system doesn't collapse, it pauses. And in that pause, everything is questioned, everything is examined, everything is redefined. The palace has made its move, the trust is locked, and the silence that follows isn't empty. It's waiting for answers, waiting for clarity, waiting for truth to finally step forward and prove itself. Because until it does, nothing moves. And just when it seemed like the silence itself was the story, something even more unsettling slipped through the cracks. Quiet, controlled, and impossible to ignore. Because Clause 3 didn't activate in a vacuum. It was triggered. And what triggered it wasn't scandal, it was precision. Behind the scenes, while the public tried to decode the freeze, a name began circulating in legal corridors, never shouted, never leaked loudly, but repeated enough to make even senior officials pause. No title, no royal connection, no public profile, just 2 letters and a claim powerful enough to shake a system built on certainty. She wasn't a media figure, she wasn't chasing headlines, and that alone made her dangerous in a way gossip never could be. Because this wasn't noise, this was documentation. A 29-year-old American woman who until that moment had never intersected with royal narratives suddenly stepped forward with something that couldn't be dismissed as speculation. Her approach was controlled, almost clinical. No emotional appeals, no dramatic interviews, just evidence, sworn statements, notarized records, carefully assembled documents that weren't designed to provoke but to withstand scrutiny. And at the center of it all, one claim, that she was the biological daughter of Meghan Markle. Now pause, not because of the shock, but because of the timing. Her stated birth date placed her existence in the mid-1990s, a period already surrounded by transition, secrecy, and incomplete narratives. A time when records weren't digital, when lives could overlap quietly, when truths could exist without being fully documented. And suddenly, that period matters. Because Clause 3 doesn't care about reputation, it cares about lineage. Anne didn't demand money, didn't ask for titles, didn't even seek recognition in the traditional sense. Her request was unnervingly simple: acknowledgement of truth, access to accurate medical history, clarity, nothing more. And that restraint changed everything. Because systems like the monarchy are built to resist chaos. They can dismiss drama, ignore speculation, outweigh controversy, but they cannot ignore documentation. They cannot ignore a claim that is structured, verified, and legally presented without emotional noise. Once that claim entered the system, the question was no longer, is this true? The question became, can we afford not to verify it? And that's the moment everything shifted. Because Clause 3 isn't triggered by conclusions. It's triggered by questions. And Anne didn't bring chaos. She brought a question so precise it forced the system to respond. Suddenly, hypothetical concerns became procedural obligations. Silence became liability. And what had once been buried under years of assumption surfaced as something that needed to be examined, not publicly, but thoroughly. Investigators quietly, methodically began reconstructing timelines, not to accuse, not to expose, but to understand. And what they found wasn't explosive in the way headlines crave. It was worse. It was incomplete. Fragments, gaps, administrative pauses, records that should exist but didn't, transitions that were acknowledged but not formally documented, moments that at the time seemed insignificant but now, under scrutiny, felt deliberate. At the center of this reconstruction, another name emerged: Joe Giuliano. Not a royal, not a public figure of importance, but a presence in a timeline that suddenly mattered. References to a possible engagement, even whispers, quiet containment maintained of a brief marriage. Nothing confirmed, but nothing dismissed either. Because in systems like this, absence is not neutral. It's evidence waiting to be interpreted. And then came the detail that made everything heavier. A sealed annulment request referenced within Catholic procedural archives, not publicly accessible, not widely discussed, but structured, traceable, real enough to require review. And within that request, a single line, a mention of an unbaptized child, not proof, not confirmation, but enough to transform speculation into procedure. Because the monarchy doesn't operate on what is proven immediately. It operates on what requires verification. And now, verification was unavoidable. This wasn't about morality, not about personal choices, not about rewriting the past. This was about disclosure. Because royal systems rely on complete transparency. Every relationship, every commitment, every detail that could influence legitimacy must be known. Not for control, but for certainty. And if anything was omitted, misunderstood, or never fully examined, then the foundation built on that information becomes unstable. Not wrong, just uncertain. And uncertainty is something the monarchy cannot afford. Because lineage is law, inheritance is structure, and structure cannot function on assumption. Suddenly, what had once been accepted as settled began to feel fragile. Not because it was proven false, but because it had never been tested. And untested truth is not truth in a system like this. It's risk. That's what unsettled officials the most. Not what might be revealed, but what had never been questioned at all. Because continuity had always been assumed. Generations flowing seamlessly into one another. No interruptions, no deviations. But assumption is not verification. And now, for the first time in decades, that difference mattered. The inquiry didn't accuse. It paused. And that pause, just like the inheritance freeze, was enough to shift everything. Because when a system built on permanence pauses, it reveals its vulnerability. And once vulnerability is acknowledged, it cannot be unseen. Inside the monarchy, the response was immediate but invisible. They called it quietly legacy lockdown. No announcements, no dramatic gestures, just controlled adjustments. Prince William moved first, authorizing the suspension of all references, projects, and financial pathways connected to the Sussex branch. Not as punishment, not as retaliation, as insulation. A containment strategy. Princess Anne followed, freezing charitable associations without explanation. Not removing, not replacing. Freezing. Because in royal language, a freeze is not temporary. It's conditional. Princess Catherine's response was even more calculated. Silence. Carefully curated appearances. No references. No indirect acknowledgement. A narrowing of narrative so precise, it spoke louder than any statement ever could. Because in this system, omission is communication. And what was omitted was everything. Across the Atlantic, the shift was quieter, but just as telling. Hollywood didn't issue statements. It withdrew. Meetings delayed. Projects paused. Conversations left unfinished. Alliances that once seemed unbreakable began to dissolve without confrontation, not rejection. Distance. Tyler Perry, once a visible supporter, stepped back. No conflict. No explanation. Just absence. And in Hollywood, absence is everything. Because influence isn't held. It's maintained. And without momentum, it fades. What was once framed as independence now began to feel like isolation. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just empty. And suddenly that choice wasn't theoretical anymore. It was immediate. That night, King Charles addressed the nation. No drama. No indulgence. Just clarity. No inheritance without verification. No restoration without certainty. Simple words, but final. Because the monarchy doesn't survive on sentiment. It survives on structure. And structure does not bend. As the palace lights dimmed and corridors filled with quiet conversations, one phrase began to circulate, softly, almost reluctantly. Sometimes to protect the crown, you must let go of the prince. Not as judgment, as necessity. Because this was no longer about individuals. It was about the system. And systems do not pause for emotion. They move, with or without you. The reckoning had begun. And this time, there would be no silence left to hide behind.